Hi, everybody. It's Susan here, and I thought we would have a look finally at this eclipse coming up in Scorpio. This is the second Mars-ruled eclipse this eclipse season. So we just had the April 20th eclipse in Aries at the very last degree of Aries. And now we have on the 5th of May a lunar eclipse. This is a penumbral eclipse. It means it's not super strong in terms of visibility. I think it's super strong in terms of impact. This Mars-ruled eclipse season is always going to be a little more intense than other eclipses that might be ruled by different signs. Not to say that we're not living in intense times anyway, but an extra dose of intensity just to shake us up every now and then. It'll bring us back to attention, hopefully, to what is actually going on around us. The big themes, I think, in this period of time are around love and loss, around security and insecurity, around hopes and fears. And this is because of the axis of Scorpio and Taurus, which have been activated since the beginning of January 2022. So just to remind you, this is a tropical zodiac. It's right on the screen in front of you. It's describing the chart, as you see in the upper left side of the screen. But for those who ask in the comments, yes, it's a tropical zodiac that I'm using. I sometimes make reference to the nakshatras, which I will do. And the nakshatras are based on the stars, and they're independent of the zodiac. So this lunar eclipse is taking place on the 5th of May universal time at 14 degrees of Scorpio, 52 minutes, arc minutes of a degree. And that is at 5:23 roughly universal time, which is about 7:23, for example, my time in Brussels for Europe, and that's around 1:23 in the afternoon New York time. So for those of you who are in Australia, New Zealand, or East Asia, this is the next day. In fact, it's overnight for you. Which actually gives you better visibility. You can have more visibility certainly towards the end of the eclipse in Europe as well. But otherwise, if it's happening during the daytime, nobody will really notice that. So the visibility is stronger the further east we go in the world. So Scorpio is fixed water, and it's deep emotions. It's emotions that are often unconscious, things that we don't see. So all of the water signs represent emotions, but Scorpio is fixed and potentially stubborn and resistant to change. But that fixity of Scorpio also can create a certain tolerance, even a high tolerance to suffering and chaos and intensity. And in fact, even an unconscious attraction to that. And so many Scorpios seem to have very turbulent lives. And what they often don't recognize is that they're actually unconsciously seeking out this turbulence. So it's not for nothing that Scorpio is known as an intense sign. And if you're a Scorpio, you'll be fed up hearing that by now. But, there we are. These are the archetypes, and they work. This is the thing. Scorpio is mysterious. It's all the stuff that is hidden from us. It's one of the hidden houses. They're ruling the 8th house in the natural zodiac. The 4th, the 8th, and the 12th houses are what we call the hidden houses. They're very intimate, things that are not really clear day to day. That can be hidden in terms of our internal process, in terms of how we're thinking about things or how we're feeling things, which is not always obvious to others and often very indiscernible, especially with regards to Scorpio. Scorpios are known for their inscrutability. And so these hidden aspects of ourselves often come out in ways that are confusing even to the person who's experiencing these emotions. So I think one of the things that Scorpio represents the best is this capacity to withstand difficulty, to understand difficulty, and especially to overcome difficulty. And one way of looking at that is to think of it as a breaking through a breakdown. So you have to go through the breakdown, then you get to the breakthrough. And that's that energy of the phoenix rising from the ashes. And that's that energy also of, say, Shiva in the form of Nataraja, which is the form of Shiva that is dancing the universe into existence. There's a constant cycle of breaking down, decaying, shedding, letting go, and then in the same moment recreating and re-inspiring. And this is happening on a cellular level in every living being at all times. So this is how our life actually is, and it's almost like it's so obvious that it's hidden. We don't, of course, go around every day thinking, oh, I'm in the mode of breaking down and regenerating in every moment of every day. But when we start to bring our attention inwards, we can sense that there's no such thing as a fixed moment. There's no such thing as something that is unchanging, because whatever is unchanging has what you could call died. But even what is dead is in a process of decay and transformation. And so there is no such thing in our world as something that is fully fixed. And so it's only a certain degree of fixity that we're talking about here, and yet that does psychologically create a certain amount of resistance or stubbornness. So that transformation, this rebirth process that Scorpio is really emphasizing here with the moon in Scorpio, of course, opposite the sun. So the moon is here in the sign of Scorpio. The opposition to the sun is what creates a full moon. It's what we're bringing our attention to. It's what we're becoming aware of. And this awareness is something that we can do something with. So the awareness is not just to say, oh, wow, this is whatever it is. It's to say, and then what? What do I do with this awareness? Full moons always reveal something to us. This, of course, is going to be in relationship to previous new moons. So if you go back in 2022, November of 2022, and the eclipses that were happening around that time, you're now kind of seeing a result of that. You're seeing this revelation of something that happened 6 months earlier. Now, the weird thing here is that normally we get a new moon and then a full moon, like in the tropical sign, for example, of Taurus. Normally we would have had a new moon and then had this full moon. But what's happened is, because we've had 2 new moons in the tropical sign of Aries, one at the very beginning of Aries, and then one at that was on the 21st of March, and one at the very end of Aries, and that was on the 20th of April. Now we're being pulled into Taurus, but the realization is coming before we have something that can symbolize what is new to us in Taurus. So the realization is coming kind of full force, emotionally and psychologically, without a sense of, oh, this is what we're working towards. Now, of course, this is also just a paradigm. This is just an idea. The template of a tropical zodiac is just something that we work with in terms of trying to understand the world around us. It doesn't have any fundamental basis in reality, but it's an interesting way of looking at the dilemmas that we're faced with right now, because we feel very emotional about what's going on. And we can see that not just because the moon is in Scorpio, but because we also have quite a lot of energy in the emotional signs of water. And the ruler of this moon is Mars in Cancer. And then we also have Saturn in Pisces, Neptune in Pisces, which have been coloring the scene for the last month or so, a little bit more now, 6 or 8 weeks already. With Neptune, it's been 12 years. So it's a long shift of trying to understand ourselves through compassion and through our higher, hopefully, spiritual nature. Or do we evade? And this is where Saturn comes in here and says, no, this is our work is now this. Our work is this understanding spiritually and emotionally, finding a solid footing in our beliefs and showing up responsibly wherever we are usually tending to avoid or evade responsibility. So this is wherever Pisces is found in your chart, but it's resonating very strongly at the time of this full moon, because it's in this resonance that we find the emotional solution, let's say, or the emotional understanding of what it is that we're going through. So this whole moon in Scorpio energy is very much about letting go. It's a south node eclipse. Scorpio is all about release. It's on a physical level, on a biological or medical astrology level, it represents everything that we excrete. All of the emunctory functions, that's the things that allow us to get rid of toxins in the body. All the elimination functions of the body are Scorpio. And so we're literally trying to let go of something, and it's very final, because this is the last South Node lunar eclipse that we'll have in Scorpio for at least 9 years, because I think we have one in 9 years' time, but let's say a good long time. This is something that we're looking at now as a finality. There's something that we're recognizing as final, ruled by Mars that is in its fall in Cancer. Now, there's a really interesting dynamic here, because there's a mutual exchange between the moon in Scorpio and Mars in Cancer, both of which are in their fall. That means that they don't perform well. The moon is exalted in Taurus, and that's where we find the sun. But Mars is exalted, or actually rules Scorpio. Its exaltation point is Capricorn, but it rules Scorpio. And so this is it's a mutual reception, which means that the communication is supportive and even stronger. So there's a determination here, a deep searching, a seeking for understanding through potential challenge, through the sense of what we find really difficult to feel, to express through our emotions. One of the things that stands out really strongly for me at this time is a feeling of loss that is particularly related to trust. The Scorpio energy is always finds trust difficult. Issues around trust and fear of betrayal are really huge with the energy of Scorpio, and it cuts both ways. Can a Scorpio be trusted? And they go with the energy of mistrust and jealousy, and all of those emotions have to be seen, again, like I said, both ways. It's often where we start to project onto others what we're actually experiencing or living ourselves. So issues of trust right now are really huge, and this is a time of acknowledging all of the loss that we have experienced, especially since January 2022, at the time the nodes first came in to the Scorpio and Taurus axis. The trust around leadership, the trust around a person's word. This can be a loss of trust in our government, loss of trust in each other. Do we feel even safe with each other? The loss of relationships. It's an axis of relationship as much as any other. This is the relationship of what we share, in the Scorpio signature, the 8th house signatures, what we share and what we value. And do we share those values? And that can be financial, that can be emotional, romantic, but also just intimate in terms of friends, for example, or people we think we want to share a space or time in life with. There's a loss of connection with family and with friends. The last year and a half particularly has been very revelatory. The couple of years preceding that were, of course, very intense as well, but there was such a heaviness around that period of what to believe, who to trust. This last year and a half has been really about revelation about all of those things. And I think this has been quite an awakening for many people who were perhaps a year and a half ago not ready to acknowledge certain things. And now things that are openly spoken about, we couldn't speak about a year and a half ago. Things that would get you banned from social media can now almost, not quite, but now be spoken about. And even on mainstream platforms, people are speaking about things. Questions around the medical procedures, around the pandemic responses, around the war, around the motives for all of these things. And this has caused an uncertainty and a lack of trust. And this loss of trust for what we thought we could trust is what we are finding very unstable. So this energy is, the real maximum instability right now. And so it's one of the reactions when we feel unstable, and this is where Scorpio gets its reputation for lashing out. Whenever we feel fear, we lash out. We want to hurt. We want to protect ourselves from the pain that we feel inside, and so we lash out. And what we really need to do is instead come deeper in. This is another invitation of Scorpio in a way that allows us to come to terms with what we have lost, come to terms with the feeling of insecurity that we have. If we look at the axis of Taurus as being what makes us feel secure, the Scorpio is what makes us feel insecure. That's why we find jealousy and all of those judgments and the underhanded behaviors, because we feel insecure, that we revert to these types of what you could almost describe as antisocial behaviors. And this is something that we all are invited to experience right now. What is it that's going on internally, deep inside? What do we need to take care of? You know, if we look at Taurus as our self-care, what it is that sustains us, you know, not just financially, but our values. What values do we have that sustain us? And then we look at what is true for us. This is an axis of truth. You know, in so many ways we can find truth in all the different signs of the chart. But Scorpio is known for also the secretive side, which can also be translated into lying. You know, the absence of truth, and that is, you know, in terms of the deeper sense of lying to oneself, you know, not just verbally lying to another person. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the dishonesty that we can pretend that we're feeling okay when we're really not, or that we can lie to ourselves that we're in a situation that's good for us when really it's not. You know, this is part of the fixed sign dilemma. This is, in fact, very strongly seen in the Taurus and Scorpio axis. It's often staying way too long in situations that are actually really harmful. So what are we ready to leave now? What are we ready to walk away from? For some of us, it's going to be a relationship. For some of us, it's going to be a thought, an idea, a belief. For some of us, it's going to be around our need to feel more materially secure, because, of course, Taurus is material security as much as the values. All of that is going to be playing out in myriad ways through all of society at the same time. And so people can become highly reactive. Now, just notice that these are periods in time. This is the chart for the eclipse. And by the way, it's the maximum point of the eclipse. This is why it is not the same degree point as the full moon. It's almost exactly the same, but it's not exactly the same. It's the maximum degree of the eclipse, which is why it's called an eclipse chart, not the full moon in Scorpio chart. So that's always going to be just a little different. Sometimes it's a few seconds apart, sometimes it's a couple of minutes apart. That's a technical thing for the astrologers out there. You don't need to worry about these things. But just to say that there's this idea of what it is that Taurus represents in terms of what makes us feel secure, that can be both material and emotional in terms of what our values represent. What can we put our faith in? What can we trust? What can we touch? What can we know is real? And the reality of Taurus is an outer reality. It's an earthly reality. And the reality of Scorpio is hidden. It's the deeper stuff, which is equally real, but often we're afraid to look there. It's the things that we know to be true that we don't want to look at. And this is part of that problem of stuckness in the axis of Taurus and Scorpio. The things that scare the hell out of us, you know, this cognitive dissonance that allows us to say, everything's okay, well, the house is burning down. You know, and collectively our house is burning down. And this is where we have trouble in the media, where we're at this, especially in the Western world, and particularly in the American experience, and this is not, again, a judgment on American people. This is a perspective on what is going on in the USA at the moment, which baffles most of the rest of the world. There is a very clear shift towards untruth. We see this in all of Europe as well. We see this incredible tendency to be able to completely ignore the reality of a situation and say something completely different. This is what Orwell called double speak, I think it was, the ministry of truth. What you see, you ignore. Ignore it. It's not real. What you see, what we tell you is the truth. And now this is incredibly destabilizing because people around you are knowing that things are not real, things are not going on the way that they're told, and yet everybody's afraid of everyone else. And therefore we continue to nod our heads and say, yeah, it's okay. It's all fine. But the cognitive dissonance, which we feel this very, very strongly in Scorpio, is incredibly disturbing. It makes us feel insecure and it makes us lash out. It makes us lash out emotionally. That's that Mars and Cancer representing that hidden, percolating emotion that comes out in inappropriate ways. And so we lash out in the grocery store, we lash out in the car, we lash out at each other where there's not any problem between us. The problem is elsewhere, but it's too huge to be comprehended. And so Scorpio here is asking us to find healing. This axis between Taurus and Scorpio is also fundamentally a deep healing process. And finding the source of the suffering is Scorpio's job. The healing that comes through Taurus is very pragmatic. It's very practical. Take this herbal tea. Eat these vegetables. Take this medication. This is Taurus healing. Have this massage. Let me give you a hug. And Scorpio healing is, why is this happening? What is underneath all of this? So our individual healing is what is necessary right now. We can't fix what's going on amongst other people. We can certainly offer assistance where it's requested, but we can't force our version of the world on other people. We can only do this from the inside out. And the more that we heal from the inside out, the less we're going to lash out at other people. Just yesterday, I posted a video from a friend of mine, Chris Wallace, whose spiritual name is Harish. And I invite you to watch this video. It's about how we project onto others and how we are pathologizing each other in a way that's deeply, deeply divisive. And this is happening amongst people who really believe they're very profoundly spiritually advanced. It's not just the average person doing it, but it's people who feel somehow superior to others because they feel that they are living a spiritual life. And this is where this cognitive dissonance is coming in, where we're not seeing what's going on. We're seeing one thing in the way that we want to see it, and we're going to pretend that the other thing is not happening. We can compartmentalize different aspects of ourselves. All of it has to be looked at. With Scorpio, we look under the rocks. We turn the soil upside down. Taurus is on the surface of the soil. Taurus is it's the fruit that you're collecting above the ground. It's the vegetables. It's the stuff that's there, the cows, the whole stuff that we can see. That is the product of the compost, which is Scorpio. And that Scorpio compost is where we find the solution to the suffering. We have to go really, really deep. It's intuitive. And that personal healing, which is an individual job, is going to have to be intuited by yourself to go to the dark places. Go to the places that you're afraid to look. Acknowledge the fears. Acknowledge that you have lost trust. Acknowledge that the people you thought were going to save you are actually the people that are in fact harming you. And acknowledge that that's because you gave your power away. Scorpio is very much connected to power plays as well. This whole power dynamic is very Scorpionic. Trying to manipulate, trying to hold power. That's part of the Scorpio archetype. And when we feel we have been played, there's a feeling of deep loss around that. It's a loss of faith, a loss of a sense of what we thought was true. It's a loss of connection because we thought that person was our friend and they're not. This betrayal of relationship, this betrayal of what is true. It's very profoundly Scorpionic. Let's look at Pluto as a Scorpionic force for transformation. So Pluto doesn't represent death. A lot of people get freaked out by Pluto. Scorpio can represent death as a, in terms of the transformational process, but Saturn is ultimately the Lord of death, Lord of karma. So Pluto is not supposed to represent, in the mythology, death. It's Hades, the Lord of the underworld. And this is about transformation. Pluto is what price is your soul? And so Pluto, or Hades, was not killing people. You're not going to your death. You're going to the place where you transform. You take on another layer of understanding of this worldly experience, where Hades was transforming people. They could go back, just like Persephone, going back and forth between the underworld and the outer world. This transformation is a process that is terrifying, because we have to go from one place to another, and we can't take the same notions of self in between those two places. So it's very scary. This is all about the ego, loss of ego. Where we find Pluto is what are you willing to trade for power? What are you willing to trade to not be afraid? What are you willing to give up to be fabulously wealthy, let's say? And we see that all around us. You look at the extension of the word Pluto, it's plutocrats. We live in a plutocracy, people who are very rich, who rule the world in so many different ways. And we look at those individuals and we say, well, they have sold a part of themselves. They've sold a part of their humanity. They've given that up to be Plutonian. And they sacrificed that for power or for money. What's your threshold? You know that saying, everybody has a price. What's your price? This is terrifying, because the image of the self that we have is usually much more sanitized. But now we have to start to look deeply. What's your price? Are you willing to sacrifice your whole freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom to spend money as you want, so that you can have convenience, everything at your fingertips in your phone? Are you willing to sacrifice your capacity to decide for yourself so that you can evade and avoid difficult decisions? So this is where we have to start to look deep before we go around saying how we're in this role, we're in this place that we can't get out of. We have to look where we've put ourselves in that place to begin with. Now here's where the answer comes, I think, in this particular configuration, and that is this very interesting slowing down energy that is not only coming from a now retrograde Pluto. Pluto went retrograde on the 2nd of May. So in this eclipse, Pluto is retrograde. In the previous eclipse of the 20th of April, Pluto was direct. So now Pluto is slowly going back at the same time that Mercury is retrograde. Mercury went retrograde just a couple of hours after the previous eclipse. So Mercury will go direct again on, I think it's the 14th of May. And these two planets trying to deepen our understanding, deepen our connection to what we fear. Where do we give up our power? Where do we need power? Where do we want and crave power? And what is the deeper transformational process here? And then the Mercury retrograde, well, what is it that I value? Have I understood this clearly? What is it that I need to feel secure in the sign of Taurus? And Mercury is right there, in between the Sun and the North Node. And so this realization is going to take us in a new direction. Sun is conjunct Uranus, which is very much in connection to what it is that's coming. What's the next thing? What's our new orientation? Ideally based on an understanding of our values, what we need to feel secure. Now, that Mercury is in a mutual reception with Venus in Gemini. So our values, thinking about our values, communicating around our values, with Venus ruling that Mercury in Taurus in the sign of communication and also representing money and exchanges of all kinds. And Gemini symbolizes siblings as well. If we think of each other as brothers and sisters, siblings, global siblings, we have a lot to try to understand here in terms of how we communicate with each other. What do we need to say to each other? What do we need to learn? Venus in Gemini is very interested, very curious about learning new things, talking about new things, discovering through the intellect, through communication. Mercury is very much about that connection to source, connection to values in Taurus, connection to what makes us feel secure. What do we need to say? What do we need to communicate? What do we need to take care of in all of those ways? I think this is kind of a resolution point. It's the point where we can start to see, well, there is something that we can shift here. This is the Uranus conjunct this sun and opposing the moon. What do we need to shift? What's the new orientation? Uranus is at the same point now that it was last summer, July and August, and especially the 31st of July, 1st of August, where we had the triple conjunction between the North Node and Uranus and Mars. So go back in that period of time and notice what was going on. We could even go all the way back to 1999. There was this amazing eclipse in August, 11th of August, 1999. There's so much resonance with this chart. I don't want to go through all of that, but there's a lot of resonance with this chart. And we'll look at that with some other astrologers when we meet in a few days, and I'll post that video as well. But there's so much resonance with what is going on over longer periods of time. And if we go back even just to last summer, what was going on? Or the previous new moon in Scorpio, what was going on last November in your life? Try and understand these things from these deeper ways of looking at things. So if we look at also from the point of view of the nakshatras, we can also see that the nakshatra of the moon is Vishaka. And Vishaka nakshatra is about difficulties or needing to relate differently within partnerships, finding the tendency to scrape against each other, especially with the moon there, because the moon is inconstant. The moon its desires are fluctuating all the time. There's this kind of circumstantial change. So there's a fluctuation according to the circumstance, and there's a lack of what you could call integrity in terms of the relationship. And so those difficulties in partnerships emerge from power struggles within relationships. So you get these kind of adversarial relationships with the moon in Vishaka Nakshatra. And we need to look at that too. So where are we being inconstant? Where are we not showing up in an authentic way or with integrity in relationships? And yet we somehow expect others to do the same. We still expect that of others, yet we don't bring it to the relationship. So I just want to put that out there. Vishaka Nakshatra is one of the very powerful lunar nakshatras. It's really about trying to overcome these struggles, these difficulties. Where can we master our emotional nature, especially with the moon there? We have to find the self-mastery through the emotions. Now, this Venus is in a really lovely sextile to Jupiter. Jupiter's ruled by that Mars that's not so, it's a bit edgy in Cancer. It's not so clear about its emotions. Jupiter's very impulsive in Aries. And Jupiter is very close to Eris as well, which is about putting the finger on what is wrong, pointing out hypocrisy, trying to understand deeply. And that Jupiter is in a sextile to Venus. So the capacity here for understanding our new preferences, the things that we want, the things that we need through wisdom, Jupiter, wisdom. Understanding that there's got to be something now in terms of our beliefs around what is going on through our relationships, through diplomacy, through money, that has to change. It's this Uranian requisite for change that we've had since May of 2018. It's very focused in this particular moment. And this is the opportunity for really starting to find a new way of looking at all of these things. Just as Jupiter is about to approach its ingress on the 16th of May into Taurus, so that Venus will rule Jupiter on the 16th of May when it moves into Taurus from a much better place, by the way. Venus will be in Cancer at that time, and that's a much more comfortable place for Venus to be, and a much better place for all of us to feel this change. So there's a certain amount of hope for calmer periods to come. But we have to find that calm first internally. So as these energies are churning away really, really deep down, especially that scorpionic tendency to go really, really deep, or to avoid going deep, we have to resolve from the inside out, acknowledge the fear. What is it that you can no longer deny? What can you no longer avoid? What secrets are you discovering? The secrets that are emerging through the news, it's literally hourly, where the news cycle used to be kind of like every week, maybe every couple of weeks, there'd be something interesting coming up that was really major. Now it's hourly. It's insane how fast the news cycle has become. And it's really difficult for us to process. Like I said before, there's this cognitive dissonance. No, tell me it's not happening. Tell me it's not true. I can't believe this. I don't know how often I've said it or heard that in the last couple of years. So what can we no longer deny? What secrets are being revealed? This will happen in your life, and it will happen in our collective life. These are things that we need to slow down. Mercury retrograde, Pluto is now retrograde. Slow down and try to understand so that we can move forward, so that we can go in a direction that allows us to make the transformation that this moon in Scorpio is asking. So as Pluto is going retrograde, it's going over the last few months, last 4 or 5 months of progress. That progress has been between Capricorn and Aquarius. It's going to retrograde into Capricorn again on the 11th of June. So go back over the last few months. Go back over the fears of the past few months. Go back over all of the different changes and the things that we were told in one way that turned out to be, in fact, the opposite. It's that do as I say, not as I do kind of energy, and this look the other way, don't look here kind of energy that is so powerfully strong right now. The older you are, the more jarring this will be, because those of us who have grown up with a particular script or a way of seeing the world, a way that we were more open to talk about things, more open to observe things, all of a sudden that script is being thrown away and we are being tightened down. The screws are becoming very, very tight. And we have that feeling with Pluto going through Aquarius that there's a lot of distrust socially and that there's a lot of fear around social control. Now go back over these last few months and try to position yourself there. Understand that. Where do you operate from? Are you able to operate in a way that feels free and liberating? Or are you operating in a way that feels like you're responding, lashing out even to controls? Here's where we find Lilith. Lilith very close to Mars in Cancer. Lilith is about where we're pissed off, basically. It's the things that we recognize are infuriating, are challenging us in every way. Emotionally, especially in the sign of Cancer. And so again, we want to understand, so what is the resonance here? What is the thing that I'm angry about? What is the thing that I cannot tolerate? What is the thing that I need to speak? This is the same message that is squaring Lilith with this very strong Eris. So I don't always use these planets, or these positions in the chart, these Lilith is actually a mathematical point, much like the nodes, and Eris is an asteroid. I don't always use these, but when I see them coming up in a chart that speaks very clearly through connections, conjunctions, or aspects of any kind, I want to point them out. That's why when you do a reading with me, sometimes people will not see these things in the chart. They're not resonating so strongly. And other people, it's one of the things we talk about. But collectively, it's time to look at, how do I feel about this? What is this rage? What is this rage burning in me? Where is it coming from? And how can I process this? And now that Lilith is in a very strong resonance also with Neptune, which is a double-edged sword, because that Lilith trining Neptune can be that desire to look away, the desire to say, it's all fine, it's all good, I feel fine, it's all good, I do my meditation, I'm good. And that delusional potential of Neptune trining Lilith can be very dangerous. It can be something that is that prevents us from seeing ourselves and the role that we're playing in all of this, but also, more importantly, prevents us from seeing where we are being played and where really we need to step up. And so that Neptune Lilith in more of an empowered role is understanding the capacity to really spiritualize this situation, not evade it, not avoid, not try and pretend it's better than it is, but to spiritualize the situation where we see that now we have a capacity to understand profoundly that the human experience is much, much bigger, more profound, more important than all of these human machinations that we see on the outside. And what will we do about that? So the overall lesson for me here, as we have these two very powerful eclipses ruled by Mars this spring, is about learning to balance our conflicting desires, either internally or with one another, and how we relate that need for balance, the need for an inner trust, an inner security, a feeling of, is this true? Is this real for me? With the outer or otherwise expressed need for comfort and security. Can we balance that? What's the trade-off for me? The trade-off is coming from the Pluto. What's the price of my soul? So focus on mutual goals. When we talk about Vishaka Nakshatra ruling this moon, the conflict is part of the lesson. It's not inherent. It doesn't have to endure. What can we find? Our mutual goals. What are our mutual needs? What is mutually beneficial? What is the greater good for all of us? And don't focus on the differences. Part of the power play that suits a certain very small percentage of the globe is to divide us, to make us angry with each other in perpetuity. You're the wrong color. You say the wrong words. You do the wrong things. You're evil. I don't even see who you are anymore. I see you as an identity. This is this whole toxic way of looking at the other, and indeed looking at oneself with this strongly egoic sense of identity. And this is what we can look at deep inside. Why do I need this lashing out? Why do I need to protect myself? Why do I believe I have this identity? This is part of the Aries understanding, Chiron in Aries, trying to figure out, my identity, my self-esteem through identity. And this is something that we can really deeply practice from within. Why am I so attached to this way of seeing myself or the world? And is it true? So on that note, I wish you a great exploration of all of these deeper questions. Scorpio is where we find one of the most rich and powerful transformations on every level in our life. And if you are afraid of doing that work, you will live in fear. And that's kind of the simple message here. Where Are you afraid? Where is that fear actually a self-fulfilling prophecy? Where you find courage, which is, by the way, the traditional symbolism of Scorpio, the eagle. And the eagle is very courageous. It's fearless. It's aware. It's got a piercing awareness, clear-sighted and intelligent awareness. That's the ancient symbol for Scorpio. Work with that. If you don't do this work from the inside out, you constantly subject yourself to the power of others over you. And that leaves you paranoid, and it leaves you jealous, and it leaves you comparing. Free yourself up from that. That's the ultimate transformation that Scorpio can bring. And slow down at this time. Take that Mercury retrograde cue. Slow down. Give yourself a couple of weeks around this time where you can really look deep inside and say, what's really going on here? And what do I need to change from the inside out so that I can be a more whole and integrated human being in this quite insane world that we live in? So I wish you all the best in this process. I'm going to post another video separately with all of the signs together, and you will be able to go sign by sign and see in your tropical natal chart how this is showing up for you for the sun and moon and ascendant signs. So much love to all of you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.